It was a warm summer evening in August 1987, the kind that made the air smell of sun-baked pine and lake water. The little mountain town of Rockford, Oregon, had already quieted down after the weekend bonfire at Miller's Lake. Radios hummed low through screen doors, and the glow of porch lights shimmered off rows of parked trucks. Among them was a beat-up blue Ford belonging to 17-year-old Eli Turner. Inside the cab, the dashboard rattled to a soft rhythm as he and his best friend, 16-year-old Nora Hayes, pulled away from the dirt clearing where their friends were still laughing around the fire. They promised they'd be home before midnight. Their laughter faded behind them, swallowed by the tall pines that stood like sentinels over the winding lake road. The sound of the truck carried through the forest for a moment, then blended with the cicadas and the far-off call of a loon. For a town used to predictable nights, nothing seemed unusual. The moon hung low and full. The road curled past the water's edge, dusty and familiar, but somewhere between the lake and the highway. The lights from Eli's truck slipped out of sight, as if the night had simply taken them. Rockford was the kind of place where everyone knew what everyone drove, what everyone ate for breakfast, who came home late, and who didn't. So when Nora's mother woke up at midnight to an empty driveway and no sound of tires on gravel, she noticed immediately. By 3 a.m., her worry had turned into panic. She called the sheriff, her voice trembling as she repeated the same words over and over. They should have been home hours ago. Deputies met at the edge of the lake before sunrise. Flashlights cut thin beams through the fog, while volunteers searched the shoreline, calling the teenagers' names into the trees. The forest answered only with the slow drip of water and the creak of branches. The sheriff ordered the lake dragged, but the water gave up nothing. No skid marks on the road, no broken glass, not a single piece of debris. By dawn, the story had already spread. At the diner on Main Street, people whispered over coffee mugs. Some said the pair had eloped, young love gone dramatic. Others insisted the mountain roads were cursed, that cars sometimes disappeared near the ravine after heavy rains. Old loggers talked about sinkholes, the way soft soil near the lake could swallow anything heavy enough. But under the chatter ran a quiet fear that nobody wanted to name, that something darker had happened out there. The sheriff's men followed the road again that morning. At a bend overlooking the ravine, they found faint tire impressions leading off the gravel. The marks stopped abruptly at the edge, as if the truck had hovered there before vanishing. Below, the undergrowth was untouched. No broken branches, no signs of a crash, just the hum of insects and the smell of wet cedar. For Nora's parents, each hour without news became a lifetime. Her mother sat by the phone until her hands shook too much to hold the receiver. Eli's father drove the same 5-mile stretch again and again, headlights sweeping through mist and darkness, searching for a reflection of chrome or paint. He would stop, get out, call their names, and listen. Nothing. By the second night, television crews arrived. The anchors' voices were calm, rehearsed, repeating the same phrases. 2 local teenagers missing. They filmed the sheriff's deputies dragging the lake under the cold light of portable generators. The camera caught Nora's mother's face as she looked toward the water, her lips moving silently. When asked what she was praying for, she said, "Just one sign." Days passed. Volunteers dwindled. The bonfire ashes turned to mud with summer rain. The town went back to its quiet rhythm. But something in that rhythm had changed. Porch lights stayed on longer. Parents called their kids earlier. Conversations lowered when headlights passed. And somewhere beyond the lake, the forest kept its secret, as if it had drawn a curtain over what really happened that night. Detectives would later record the official timeline. 11:48 p.m. Last sighting by a trucker heading south. 12:30 a.m. Estimated disappearance window. 3 a.m. First call to authorities. A neat row of numbers on paper. The only neat thing about the case. Everything else was chaos stitched with rumor. In the weeks that followed, search teams covered nearly every mile of forest road. A few claimed to smell gasoline near the ravine. Others said they saw new ruts that vanished after the next rainfall. But there was no proof of anything, only stories. By late September, the flyers on telephone poles had begun to curl at the edges. The case file grew thin from handling. Rockford moved on the way small towns do, slowly, without ever forgetting, pretending it had. The Turner and Hayes families stopped answering the door after dark. Eli's blue truck remained an unsolved line in the sheriff's report, its absence louder than its engine ever was. And then, after 48 hours turned into 48 days, the forest grew quiet again. The searchlights went dark. The volunteers went home. But the silence that settled over Miller's Lake wasn't the sound of peace. It was the sound of something hidden, something waiting. And it would be 30 years before the mountain finally gave it back. By the third morning, the missing persons report had already reached the state police. What began as a local search spiraled into a full-scale investigation stretching across the county. Helicopters swept low over the pines, their blades scattering mist across the treetops. Divers in black wetsuits combed the lake in slow circles, their air bubbles rising like clockwork to the surface. Troopers marked every dirt road with orange tape, every deer trail with numbered flags. But each path led to the same end, nowhere. The truck had vanished as completely as the two who rode in it. Detective Samuel Briggs arrived from Portland a week later, a 42-year-old investigator with a sharp suit that looked out of place against the mud and moss of Rockford. He'd built his reputation on logic, timelines, and evidence, not on whispers or ghost stories. The local sheriff greeted him with a firm handshake and eyes that had already seen too many false hopes. "You won't find much out there," he warned. "The woods keep what they take." Briggs only nodded, his notebook already open, his pen ready. He started with the facts. The road leading from Miller's Lake was dry that night. No rainfall, no washouts. The tire tracks ended abruptly, suggesting not a crash, but removal. No scrape marks on the guardrail, no soil displacement down the ravine. If the truck went over, it didn't leave a sign. He interviewed the last person who saw them, a trucker who remembered two laughing kids waving as they passed. Looked like any other Friday night, the man said. Then they were gone. The small-town mindset clashed with Briggs' city-bred precision. Locals talked about strange lights near the lake, about tunnels left from abandoned mines, about a cult that met in the forest clearing on full moons. Briggs dismissed them at first, scribbling folklore in the margins of his notes. But the longer he stayed, the more he saw how superstition filled the silence that evidence couldn't. People needed something to explain the emptiness, even if it was fear itself. The first and only tangible clue came from a volunteer who spotted something glinting near a creek bend 2 miles south of the lake. It was Nora's silver pendant, the one shaped like a tiny locket with her initials engraved inside. The chain was broken, the metal dulled by silt, but unmistakably hers. There was no blood, no fingerprints, no sign of struggle, just a cold charm resting in the mud like a punctuation mark that didn't end a sentence, only paused it. For weeks, that pendant was all they had. Briggs sent it to the lab, cross-checked every missing vehicle report in a 100-mile radius, and brought in search dogs from Salem. Nothing. The scent ended the same place the tire tracks did, thin air. He widened the radius, searching for any sign of the truck being towed or dismantled. Local mechanics denied ever seeing it. No one in the junkyards had a matching VIN. As the investigation dragged on, so did the media's fascination. Local TV stations replayed the same grainy footage. Nora's mother clutching a framed photo, Eli's father staring at the lake behind a line of reporters. Headlines screamed across the evening news. Teens vanish without trace. Police baffled. Anchors stood before the same patch of forest, repeating what little they knew. They filled airtime with speculation because the truth was too empty to broadcast. Briggs hated cameras, but he faced them when he had to. "We're pursuing all possible leads," he said into the microphone, his voice steady but tired. Off-screen, he confessed to his partner, "There's nothing to pursue. It's like chasing ghosts." By November, The search had grown mechanical. The same reports were cycled through the system. The same names appeared in statements. Theories multiplied. Runaways, kidnappings, accidents, cults, serial drifters passing through the Cascade routes. Each new angle gave a momentary spark of hope before fading into another dead end. Briggs began visiting the families weekly, less as an officer, more as a man trying to keep a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. At the Hayes house, the dining table remained set for 4, plates untouched, as if Nora might walk in any moment. Her mother never moved the chair. At the Turners, Eli's room stayed exactly as he'd left it, baseball cap on the hook, calendar frozen on August 1987. These homes became time capsules, preserving not just memories but denial. The winter snow arrived early that year. Search parties dwindled, then stopped. The official case log filled its final page with a single line: no new leads. The file was stamped inactive, placed in a box, and stored in the county archives. But Briggs couldn't let it go. He visited the station one last time before returning to Portland, standing beside the evidence locker with the silver pendant sealed in plastic. He marked the cardboard with a thick black pen: Turner, Hayes, 1987. Inside were his notes, maps, interviews, everything the case had become. He slid the box onto a shelf by itself, separate from the others, as if leaving space for the ending he still hoped to find. One day, he murmured, we'll open it again. Outside, the mountains stood wrapped in fog, silent and indifferent. Snow fell over the trees, burying the tire tracks, the footprints, the whispers of that summer night. For Rockford, the story faded into legend: 2 teenagers who vanished without a trace. A mystery that time would swallow whole. But time doesn't erase everything. It waits, and 30 years later, when the lake dried low and the earth began to shift, the mountain finally decided to speak. The summer of 2017 came dry and relentless. By late July, the drought had carved pale scars into the Oregon hillsides, and Miller's Lake, once deep enough to swallow a pickup hole, shrank to a patchwork of cracked silt and shallow pools. It was the lowest anyone had seen it since the 1960s, for the construction crew hired to extend the shoreline dock. It was just another blistering morning: diesel fumes, dust, and the sound of engines echoing across empty waterbeds. Around noon, Foreman Dan Kearns noticed something that didn't belong: a dull shimmer beneath the surface mud, a strange square of rust catching the light. At first he thought it was a piece of machinery left by old loggers. But as the sun shifted, the outline grew clearer. He waved his crew to stop the excavator, jumped down into the muck, and brushed the wet clay aside with his glove. Beneath it, a strip of metal and the curved edge of a windshield stared back at him. When the tow cranes finally pulled the object free, the sight drew a crowd from the nearby marina. There, caked in 30 years of mud and algae, sat a rust-red pickup truck. The shape was unmistakable, the model belonging to an era long gone. It tilted slightly on deflated tires, windows clouded with silt. One of the deputies squinted at the plate through a camera lens. The numbers matched an old file: Eli Turner's 1978 Ford. As the vehicle settled on the dry lake bed, the silence among the onlookers deepened. The sheriff ordered everyone back while deputies lifted the door. Inside was the ghost of a teenage summer frozen in time. Denim fabric clung to the seat frames like shadows. 2 skeletons sat side by side, one still wearing a frayed varsity jacket, the other a thin bracelet that shimmered faintly beneath the grime. Between them, half buried in silt, 2 high school rings gleamed in the sunlight. After 30 years, Eli and Nora had finally come home. The county immediately sealed off the site, and by dusk, tents and floodlights turned the quiet shore into a crime scene from another world. Forensics trucks rolled in, followed by a white van bearing the seal of the Oregon State University Forensic Anthropology Division. From its stepped Dr. Lila Moreno, a calm figure in khaki and gloves, her hair tied in a tight braid. She specialized in cold recoveries. cases where time had stripped everything except truth. Her equipment was far beyond what investigators had in 1987: ground-penetrating radar, laser mapping drones, microsediment samplers, portable DNA analyzers. Under her direction, every inch of the truck was documented before removal. A 3D scanner captured the dented bodywork and soil layers that held it. Technicians lifted each item with the precision of surgeons: a cracked dashboard camera, a warped cassette mixtape, a half-rotted wallet, and most haunting of all, a waterlogged disposable camera sealed in a plastic bag. Dr. Moreno labeled each with quiet precision, as if whispering to the past. The artifacts painted a picture too vivid to ignore. The cassette tape, its label smeared but legible, read Summer Mix 87. The track list scrawled in ink: Simple Minds. U2, Bon Jovi. The camera film inside, though swollen and discolored, might still hold images. The forensic team handled it like glass, placing it in a nitrogen box to dry. Each object became a bridge to that night. Pieces of normal life suddenly turned into evidence of death. But as Moreno studied the truck's interior, small details began to trouble her. The gearshift was locked in reverse. Both seat belts were unbuckled. The doors, though warped from years underwater, were found ajar, not sealed shut as one would expect from a crash into deep water. The steering column showed no sign of impact, and the handbrake had been fully engaged. It didn't fit the narrative of an accident. She crawled halfway beneath the chassis, brushing away silt to expose the undercarriage. The mud told its own quiet story, layers stacked unevenly. Disturbed long after the original submersion, she took a sediment core sample and frowned. The readings suggested movement. Something had shifted the truck years after it sank. By the next morning, news vans lined the highway. Headlines erupted nationwide. Truck found in dried lake may solve 30-year disappearance. Reporters broadcast live from the site, their microphones trembling in the dry wind. The families, now older and gray, watched from home. Nora's mother, 80 now, whispered through tears, "I knew the lake had her." Eli's father, his hands rough with time, simply said, "It's about damn time someone listened." The discovery reopened every wound the town had sealed shut. Rockford filled again with questions, speculation, and memory. People drove from neighboring counties to leave flowers along the shore. For some, it was closure. For others, the return of the truck only deepened the mystery. How had it stayed hidden through years of search and sonar sweeps? Why had no one noticed the shift in the lakebed sooner? And if it was truly an accident, why did the evidence whisper otherwise? Dr. Moreno stood at the water's edge as the sun sank behind the mountains. The truck silhouetted against the dying light. She flipped through her notes, every observation circling back to the same impossible pattern. No signs of collision. Doors open, brakes engaged. The scene wasn't frozen in chaos. It was deliberate, almost placed. She looked toward the excavated pit one last time before calling her team to pack up. Beneath the churned mud, something glittered faintly, barely visible under the silt. She crouched down, brushed it gently with her glove, and felt the edge of metal against stone, another buried layer, older and deeper than the truck itself. Her eyes narrowed as she called for a probe sample. The reading spiked unexpectedly. Whatever lay beneath wasn't natural sediment. She stood slowly, the evening wind lifting the dust around her. The cameras would report the truck as the miracle find, the long-awaited answer to a 30-year mystery. But Dr. Moreno already knew the truth was larger, heavier, still waiting in the ground, because the real shock came not from what they found inside the truck, but from what was buried beneath it. By the second week of excavation, the heat had hardened the lakebed into cracked mosaics of clay. Dr. Lila Moreno's team worked in slow, measured rhythm, brushing away layers of sediment beneath where the truck had rested. The deeper they dug, the stranger the soil looked, compact in some areas, loose in others, as though something had once been buried and then disturbed again. One of the technicians called out softly. The probe he'd inserted had met resistance at an unnatural angle. when they scraped further, the pattern emerged clearly, a second layer of compacted silt running opposite to the natural flow of the lake. It meant only one thing. The truck hadn't remained untouched since 1987. Someone had moved it. Dr. Moreno crouched by the exposed section, measuring the depth. The lower sediment dated to the late 80s, but the upper layer above it, where the truck's frame had rested, showed contamination from a later decade. The vehicle had been repositioned years after it first sank. The finding rippled through the site like an aftershock. Who would return to a crime scene so long forgotten, and why? Samples went straight to the lab, and results began to return within days. In the recovered fibers from under the chassis, they found strands of tightly woven canvas, military grade, treated with a chemical sealant not used in civilian materials. It wasn't part of the truck's original upholstery. Next came the DNA analysis. From the corroded clasp of Nora's bracelet, technicians pulled a degraded genetic profile. The first matched hers. The second did not match Eli Turner. It belonged to an unidentified adult male. Then came the most alarming discovery. Trace residue clinging to the truck's undercarriage tested positive for ammonium nitrate. Not a household contaminant, blast residue. The kind used in controlled demolitions or military-grade explosives. The lab confirmed that an explosion had occurred nearby, likely within hours of the vehicle's submersion. The scene was no longer an accident site. It was the cover of something far larger. The news brought an old name back into the story, Detective Samuel Briggs. Now 72, retired. His once sharp hair turned the color of smoke. Watched the report on his television and felt the ache of recognition. The box labeled Turner. Hayes 1987 still sat on his shelf, dusty but never forgotten. When Dr. Moreno requested him as a consultant, he didn't hesitate. He arrived at the lake wearing the same leather notebook he'd carried 3 decades earlier. The first time he met Dr. Moreno, she handed him a tablet displaying a 3D reconstruction of the truck's trajectory. Laser modeling traced the path from the dirt road to the ravine, overlaid with archival satellite photos from the U.S. Geological Survey. The images told a silent confession. Faint tire paths once visible along the lake's north edge had been erased by later flooding. Someone had used the terrain itself to hide their work. Briggs stared at the model, jaw tight. They didn't lose control, he said quietly. They were forced off. While the forensics unfolded, life returned to the story's human edges. Eli's father, now widowed and frail, visited the site for the first time since his son disappeared. The air smelled of dust and motor oil, and he stood for a long time beside the cordoned pit, hat in his hands. "I used to come here every year," he told Moreno. "The lake never looked back at me until now." Across the field, a woman adjusted a microphone clipped to her jacket. Nora's younger sister, grown now, had started a small podcast on unsolved disappearances, a way to understand what loss does when it outlives everyone it touches. She recorded the sound of shovels in the dirt, the hum of the generator, and her own voice whispering, "We're still listening." Late one night in the mobile lab, Moreno traced the clues backward. The residue suggested blasting nearby. The military fibers hinted at restricted access. She pulled records from the Oregon State Archives. Old quarry permits issued during the summer of 1987. One name surfaced repeatedly, Cascade Munitions Co., a government contractor that operated a disposal site less than a mile upstream from Miller's Lake. The deeper she read, the clearer the picture became. That same week, a wildfire had raged through the upper valley, giving cover for illegal dumping of surplus explosives. The company's shipments were marked as destroyed by fire, but the paperwork didn't match the inventory. Someone had hidden the evidence under the chaos of the disaster, and 2 teenagers may have stumbled upon it by accident. Briggs leaned over her shoulder, the light from the monitor washing his lined face. "They saw something they weren't supposed to," he said. "What if they filmed it?" Moreno whispered. Her eyes shifted toward the nitrogen case holding the water-damaged disposable camera. For days it had been drying, frame by fragile frame. That evening, she placed the film under the digital scanner. grainy negatives appeared on the screen, mostly unrecognizable smears of light and water. Then one fragment came into focus, a blurred image of the truck's rearview mirror catching a set of headlights close behind them. It wasn't a reflection. The angle proved the lights belonged to another vehicle following them that night. The lab fell silent. Moreno enhanced the exposure. The beams were too high to be from another pickup. They aligned with military transport height. A shape loomed in the background, flat-fronted, covered in canvas. Briggs exhaled slowly. "Convoy," he said. The fragment was barely an inch of film. Yet it shifted the narrative completely. If the teens had captured even a glimpse of the convoy transporting illegal munitions, it would explain everything. The chase, the crash, the silence. Outside, the lake shimmered under floodlights, a mirror reflecting nothing but darkness. Inside, Moreno stared at the frozen image, the ghost of light from 30 years ago trapped on decayed film. She saved the file and backed it up twice. Somewhere in those pixels lay the thread that could unravel 3 decades of secrecy, negligence, and buried guilt, because the last frame on that film would unravel a conspiracy 3 decades deep. It took months for the film to be restored, frame by fragile frame. Dr. Lila Moreno worked late nights in the lab, her eyes fixed on the flickering monitor as software reconstructed each image the lake had tried to erase. What emerged from the darkness was not just proof of a crime, but a confession from time itself, in one continuous sequence, barely 5 seconds long. The film revealed a convoy of unmarked military trucks moving through the forest, headlights cutting through smoke and falling ash. Their cargo was covered in heavy canvas. Behind them, flames licked at the trees from the wildfire recorded in state logs that same week. The coordinates matched the valley upstream from Miller's Lake, restricted land that, on paper, hadn't been used for decades. Moreno froze the frame. Zooming in on a truck's rear gate, stenciled faintly across the metal, was a serial number later confirmed to belong to Cascade Munitions, the same contractor Briggs had uncovered in the old quarry files. Together, the evidence drew an unbroken line between the fire, the illegal dumping, and the disappearance. The conclusion was as terrible as it was inevitable. Eli and Nora had stumbled upon the convoy that night, their camera catching what no one was meant to see. The headlights in their mirror weren't a coincidence. They were pursuit. They'd been chased off the ravine road and silenced underwater. The investigation turned from cold case to criminal inquiry. Federal agents reopened sealed archives. Moreno and Briggs presented the digital reconstruction to the state attorney's office. Paper trails that had slept for 30 years began to speak again. And in one file, buried beneath layers of approvals and signatures, they found a name that tied everything together: Colonel Walter Hensley, the logistics officer who had signed falsified fire containment orders in 1987. The man was still alive, 84, retired, and living quietly in Arizona. When the agents arrived at his door, Hensley didn't deny it. He sat in his kitchen beneath the ceiling fan, eyes hollow from years of pretending. He explained that the operation had gone wrong. The company had been ordered to dispose of volatile munitions before inspectors arrived. The wildfire gave them cover. But 2 teenagers in a pickup saw the convoy and started taking photos. "We couldn't have it leak," he said, his voice thin. It wasn't supposed to end like that. They had tracked the truck down after the incident, dragged it into the lake, and altered the records for 3 decades. Silence held the lie together. As Hensley signed his statement, he muttered a final sentence under his breath. "The mountain remembers more than people think." When the confession reached Oregon, Detective Briggs didn't speak for a long time. He stood in his living room surrounded by the old case files, his hands trembling over the box marked Turner. "Hayes, we chased this for 30 years, he whispered, "and now the truth finally catches us." To him, justice felt both heavy and hollow. The right thing, arriving too late. Dr. Moreno, on the other hand, carried the findings to the families. She presented the restored footage and the forensic reports not in a courtroom, but in the community hall of Rockford, Where the search for Eli and Nora had once begun, the lights dimmed, and the film played on a small projector. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the convoy appeared, spectral and grainy, moving through fire and fog. When the footage ended, there was only silence. Then, slowly, people began to clap, not for closure, but for the courage it took to face the truth at last. Weeks later, under a lavender sky, the town gathered at the restored shore of Miller's Lake. A candlelight vigil stretched along the waterline, hundreds of tiny flames reflecting in the calm surface. Eli Turner and Nora Hayes were laid to rest side by side, their names carved into matching stones. From a portable speaker near the memorial, the cassette found in their truck began to play. The music was warped and distant, but the melody carried softly through the crowd. "Don't you forget about me." Eli's father, frail but standing, placed his hand on Nora's mother's shoulder. Nora's sister, the podcaster, recorded the sound of the song blending with the rustle of pine leaves. "For 30 years, they were a question," she said quietly. "Now they're an answer." Detective Briggs lingered by the water until the crowd dispersed. He looked across the lake, now calm, no longer hiding what it once did. "We didn't find them," he murmured to Moreno, who stood beside him. "They let us." She didn't respond, just watched the reflection of the candles tremble, then fade as the wind picked up. When the final report closed and the headlines faded, Rockford changed again. The fear that had haunted the town for decades became something else. A story retold not in whispers, but in remembrance. Time had not erased the past. It had only waited for the world to be ready. Sometimes, the earth keeps its secrets not out of cruelty, but out of mercy, until we're ready to listen. So if you're still listening now, remember them. Remember the light on the lake, the laughter on that summer road, and the truth that finally rose to the surface. Don't let their story sink again. Subscribe to keep their memory alive, and maybe to bring others home.